Hello and welcome to the Dissidents Podcast, brought to you by the Institute for Liberal Values. This is where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. In this week's podcast, Elizabeth Spivak and Mike Burke discuss MIT's decision to no longer mandate DEI statements, Pyrrhic victories against wokery, short-term pessimism, but long-term optimism. So, good news. Apparently, MIT, which is short for Massachusetts Institute of Technology, is that correct?
Correct.
So that's not far from you.
No, it is not.
Yeah, that's New England, I think. I did a piece of American geography, correct? I'm very proud.
It's just a few miles from me, actually.
Okay, so their president has now announced that DEI statements are no longer mandatory, and she then went on even to go further and say that they don't work.
Yeah, and so just to be clear, they were never mandatory. Like, it's not like people had to sign a DEI statement to remain employed or anything like that. But this is I just want to say that because people do sometimes think that it's almost like a McCarthy era thing where you have to sign a loyalty oath or something. But maybe people are or aren't aware of this, but especially in the States, but maybe other places. I don't know. Other places also might. I mean, other places in the world. Is this required?
UK.
Yeah. Okay. So
variants on a theme, certainly.
Yeah. So now faculty members, when they apply for jobs, are required to include. So normally we include, obviously, we have a resume, also called a vita, right? And then we have like a teaching philosophy and a research statement. And so, those kinds of things that would be, relevant to our, a future job. And recently, in the last, say, 10 years or so, we've been, schools have been gradually adding this diversity statement to the list of required materials that you would submit. You also submit things like, representative publications if you have them, information about, if you had like a grant or something, maybe, you can upload other documents. But now most, I would say, I don't know if I shouldn't say, maybe I shouldn't say most now because maybe this will be the start of the end. But many schools now require this. And states like California actually have clearinghouses where they collect all of the applications for faculty jobs across the entire state, and California is a big state. And the branch campus of the flagship schools would not even see an application unless it sort of passed the diversity litmus test kind of thing. So, some places have gone even further to almost prevent people from considering those who don't have the appropriate verbiage.
Yeah, and to be clear, that these are quite, DEI is quite a narrow ideology. People are being instructed to frown on what would be called classical liberals or old-fashioned liberals like us. So it's quite a worry.
And then there's, just like anything else, there's a formula for this. So people have become, really good at just sort of creating the stock and trade of a DEI statement. So I'm not sure, how meaningful they are. And you're right. Diversity is very, is specifically, there's an understanding of what that means, what a DEI statement means. So it doesn't mean, certain like, oh, you're not the minority we're looking for, kind of.
Right.
So there's only certain groups, that matter.
Right.
And that's well understood.
And even if you were the minority that they were looking for, if you didn't identify as such, then you don't count. And diversity absolutely does not mean, by the way, people having different opinions. Like, of course,
not diversity of thought, not diversity of political, slant. Even the American Psychological Association focus on diversity. I mean, they said right in their diversity statement, oh, by the way, we're just not going to address religion and politics. We're not just going to do that right now. Stay tuned. We'll do that later. Of course, they haven't.
Of course, they haven't
they
and
haven't.
never will do.
Right.
Right. And so Massachusetts Institute of Technology is no longer requiring these. So that means we won, Elizabeth. The war is over.
If only it were so. I mean, I will, I would even be surprised, for example, this is just a rumor, so I did not hear this myself, okay? But I was, I was told that at my university, for example, they started talking about, started being an email, like an all-campus email chain amongst faculty about artificial intelligence, and we need to be talking about this. We need blah blah blah. Let's get together on this. And apparently, administrators were like, "Wait, stop! We're still doing DEI." It's like, we're not ready to move on. Don't give us something new to think about. We can't do that. We can only do one thing at a time, and we're doing DEI right now. So I don't know. I don't know that we'll see a trickle down. I mean, one of the things that I am suspicious of is that this sort of DEI, I don't know, the DNA, the DEI DNA, is a bit of a public good in many ways. So people have come to expect a certain amount of deference and special stuff, like special grant categories and special offices and, special hiring procedures and, these kinds of things. So we have, research grants that are sort of general, apply to everyone. And we have these special category grants, for, diversity conferences or for, diversity related research. So I don't know that even if they backed off on a diversity statement, as a requirement for hiring at, other institutions, I doubt very seriously, even at MIT, that some of this sort of stuff is going to go away in the short term.
Well, if you look at the statement itself, she seems to imply that DEI is a great thing. It's just that these statements don't work, and they may undermine kind of a bit of discussion. But it seems to be, look, your heart is in the right place. You're headed in the right direction. But I want to help you out. I want to make things easier for you, not make things more difficult. I'm not doing this to help the conservatives. And then she goes on to say that I think different faculties can actually still have them if they want. It's just that MIT as a university doesn't require their faculties to have it. But if the faculties want to have them, they can.
Yeah. And so when a department organizes a search, they decide. So what happens is that the university-wide, they decide, that your department can do a search. So you have a vacancy, they have the money, whatever, and your department can do a search. So then the department gets together and looks at the curriculum, the way that students are signing up for classes. Oh, we need, like in my department, maybe it's, we need somebody who can teach social psychology and who can, teach research methods and statistics, say. I'm just, making this up. So they get to decide as a faculty department exactly what the search would look like, including, whether to include whether they think a diversity statement is relevant and important. One of the things that I've always asked and never gotten an answer to is, if we require a diversity statement that, is about racial, minorities, specific racial minorities, what's to stop us from having a statement on abortion, on the climate, on, various other, on, a political litmus test, because, researchers find over and over again that, progressive faculty won't even sit at lunch say that they don't even want to sit next to somebody who, is a conservative voter, that they would reject someone's grant application if they knew they were a conservative voter, that they don't think that an article should get published if it endorses, if the research findings endorse a conservative talking point. So I'm not, I don't know where this ends, and so I'm glad that they're not making it a university-wide requirement. But I think that your point is spot on, that this certainly doesn't, because she specifically said you can still do it. I believe that many will still do it, if not most.
And that's extremely disturbing, because this is, I mean, look, it would be bad enough if it was a social sciences organization, right? But the justification that these kind of social scientists, these people working in the humanities would make for their research is they would say that, standpoint epistemology, we have to ground things in our own feelings and our own ways of interacting with the world. They'd work on a misreading of Foucault, which would be that all systems of power, all systems of knowledge are ways of exerting power. And this being the case, even though Foucault doesn't actually say that, it's Rorty misreads this from Foucault, in my opinion. But anyway, that this being the case, because all systems of knowledge are methods of power, then we obviously have to make our own a method of power. And that's why we must hire Black people who are very woke and agree with our ideology, for example. That would be how they justify it, because they're pushing back on oppression. But that's simply that epistemology just doesn't work with the natural sciences, right? Things don't become, an airplane doesn't become any better at flying if it's designed by a Black person or a white person. It just doesn't go in, because that's anti-empiricism. It's literally attacking the empirical methodology, saying that it's a means of oppression. So if you're going to be an institute of technology and you're going to incorporate that, then that would seem to be antithetical to the very philosophical basis that undermines every single, that undergirds every single discipline fundamentally that MIT would be pushing. There's a fundamental contradiction there.
So it's funny, because I just was scanning. You know how you have like all kinds of tabs open on your computer or whatever?
Yeah.
I'm sort of like scanning, like, what is this tab? Just completely by accident related to what you just said. There's an article from, when is this? August of 2023 in Skeptical Inquirer that says, the ideological subversion of biology. So biology faces a grave threat from progressive politics that are changing the way our work is done. So while I think for a fair amount of time, what you would traditionally call the hard sciences, sort of poo-pooed all of this stuff and said, oh, well, it doesn't, for, exactly what you're talking about. It's like, well, math isn't racist, and physics isn't racist, so we don't have to worry about that, because standpoint epistemology means nothing to, our field. And, it's just like 2 + 2 is 4 no matter what, but it has definitely invaded,
with this kind of pseudo Foucauldian assault on it, right? This idea that, but it's fundamental to post-colonial theory. Post-colonial theory would say, look, there's nothing bad about science per se. There's nothing inherently bad about science. It's one way of knowing things. However, it becomes oppressive, and therefore, if it becomes oppressive, it needs, and we know it's oppressive because it's being pushed by colonial institutions like Oxford University, or one of the big English universities or American ones, right? So that's how we know it's preeminent, it's dominance, it's dominant within these institutions. Therefore, we know that it has unjust power, and so in order to put it back in its place, we need to resist it. We need to deconstruct it, and we need to build up alternative ways of knowing. This is why you get like in medicine, I think in degrees in New Zealand, you're getting kind of Maori folk medicine and stuff like this being incorporated, because, you know,
So
this is also
funny,
medicine,
yeah.
and this is also as valuable as science is. And the fact that science is pushing this down is actually an example of oppression. So this scientific idea that no, it doesn't matter. A Maori traditional remedy is or isn't effective, and we would subject it to testing in the scientific method to find out whether it is. And if it is, then we incorporate it. And if it's not, well, sorry, thank you very much, and we move on. That very way of thinking is what they want to deconstruct. And that is the very fundamental philosophical basis of every single discipline, bar none, that MIT is pushing. And if you want to push that, if you want to push this post-colonial nonsense, or you want to let it creep in, then I'm sorry, that is antithetical to the very basis of your university. Before you get to anything else, before you start to work about the institutional structure, anything at all, this is an attack at the fundamental basis of that institution. And it's, you know, to say, oh, we're not going to include them because they don't work. No. The fundamental epistemology is absolutely anathema to everything that university would go for. And this is where I got pissed off with scientists, right? Because scientists are very, in the past, scientists are very, very bright people. And they spend a lot of time thinking about their discipline. They generate a lot of expertise and knowledge in that discipline. Great. And if I want to know something about that discipline, I wouldn't ask you, Elizabeth. I wouldn't ask Helen. I wouldn't claim to have that knowledge myself. I would ask them. But then there seems to be this kind of apathy that they've come down as this ideology has crept in. And it's because of this apathy that it has crept in. On the one hand, I've met scientists who have said, oh, this stuff is absolutely bonkers, of course, and it's a really big problem for the humanities and the social sciences and maybe arts and things like that. But it's never going to affect us. You know, there might be a few people paying lip service to it and therefore, and that's annoying, and I don't approve of it, and I'll speak up against that. But let's be honest, you know, we need to focus on the real science, because it's never going to affect us, and clearly it is. Clearly that you can't. That ship has now sailed. Nobody can now realistically make the case that it's not affecting them. And then the other kind of scientist that I get really annoyed with is a scientist who thinks that they're so bright that they don't need to read any of the literature or really spend any, it's just all of that stuff, it's all good. Because they don't understand the philosophical underpinnings of science, right? They could design a research method that would mirror those philosophical understandings, but they don't actually know them themselves because they haven't really thought about them. And so when they see all this DEI stuff, they don't know the philosophical underpinnings of that, but they think, oh, it's fashionable and it's progressive, therefore it must be pro-science and let's go along with it. And when somebody like me points this out to them, say, oh, you're being paranoid. No, I'm not being paranoid. I'm really not. Look at the people whose careers have been ruined by this stuff. You know, and listen to me. I know what I'm talking about. I would listen to you about biology. And when you want to know about the philosophy of this stuff, you should listen to me, because I really do know what I'm talking about. So both of those types annoy me.
Yeah. And whatever her name is, Korbluth's statement.
Korbluth, yeah.
Does nothing really to address that, because
no.
You know, she just, you know, she says, oh, it's not required, and you know, check, you know, so it's really not a whole lot different than making the decision to require them. You know, it was not done, as you point out, like not really done with a lot of thought and you know, planning. Just sort of like, oh, this is going to look good. It's normative. People approve of this, so I'll do it too. But one of the things that I had written this down, again, just sort of like ran across this in an Atlantic article. I did not read the original article, which was not out when the Atlantic article came out, but most likely is now. But it's got by somebody named John Hasness, and he says, again, in the article. In the Atlantic article, he says his article will say this. How's that? That schools are layering an abstract commitment to free speech on top of incentives that reward the suppression of free speech. So what he's saying is colleges are hoping for free speech and academic freedom and, all of the things that come with that. And hiring of the best people and, all of the tenets, as you say, of, like what a university is. So they're hoping for all of those things. But what they're paying for, where they're putting their money, is in DEI initiatives. So what happens is people get rewarded, they get incentivized for investigating, sanctioning, engaging in, hiring that's, maybe, based on DEI as opposed to merit or whatever. So people get rewarded for investigating behaviors that are offensive to some people, but they're suffering no penalty for pursuing allegations based on the contents of what would ordinarily be free speech. So this is what you and I have talked about a bunch of times, where we have this like parallel mission, right? And he's talking about sort of layering like pretty free speech language on top of this, this underlying DEI mission creep, and in just sort of like, oh, fingers crossed, hoping for the best, on the stuff that really should matter and should be the focus, while really incentivizing the other stuff by making it rewarding for people to sanction, to squelch others' free speech, or to make people feel that they can't, investigate certain topics or pursue certain, research questions. So, and I really think that, really that's what she's still doing that, right?
Mm-hmm.
She hasn't really, there's been no dismantling of DEI.
What we've got is all of these institutions just seem to be run through with cowardice. It's as if people are doing as little as they can, the minimum they can. They're placating people. This is trying to placate the free speech crowd, while also basically saying to the DEI lot, yeah, okay, look, nod, nod, wink, wink. We've said free speech is important. And look, you DEI bunch, I'm sure that you believe passionately in free speech too, don't you? I mean, it's very important that people are free to agree with you. They do. They believe in free speech for everyone who agrees with them. Because, they always cite it whenever there's kind of like a conservative thing. It's free speech. It's like, yeah, free speech for everyone who agrees with you. Great. Wonderful. So she's just placating both sides. She's trying to placate the free speech side, the more conservative leaning people, perhaps, as well as the radicals, the left-wing radicals, because they can continue with doing whatever they want.
Yeah, and frankly, that's what the, DEI proponents were, have been accusing, administrators of doing, also. Oh, you've just been placating us, right? So, it's sort of like, tag, you're it, But I just wanted to mention, in the, sort of like case of, DEI's being dismantled. So University of Michigan got an 80 million, has spent $80 million to hire 30 diverse faculty and start a mentoring program for those faculty. They got a $15.6 million grant from the National Institute of Health. It's called the Advanced Grant Program. And my university, I didn't look it up, but my university got an advanced grant too. So I don't know how much that was, but a very similar kind of mentoring program. Although I don't think it was based on diversity. I'm pretty sure it might have been on for like women who give birth, during their tenure. But $80 million, University of Michigan system is spending $80 million just to hire faculty. They have, and what, I didn't write it down, how many, they have an astronomically high number of DEI faculty in the University of Michigan system. So or I'm sorry, not DEI faculty, DEI focused employees. It's unbelievable. They have one in every department, and I'm not sure that those people are actually hired to be DEI, or if they're sort of like the the person who's supposed to monitor DEI in the such and such department. But regardless, that's what they're doing, right?
I
All
mean,
over campus. And
they're
look, Michigan is not a blue state. I mean, the state votes, conservative about how it's a kind of a purple state. So if a state like that's doing it, I mean, do you really think that MIT statement in Massachusetts, which is like, incredibly liberal, is going to make any difference?
but you know what I'm going to say now, Elizabeth? It's not liberal. There's nothing liberal about DEI. As soon as you're trying to constrain people's points of view, then you're an illiberal. Maybe a left-wing illiberal, but you're an illiberal anyway. No, and look, these employees, these DEI employees, I mean, they're essentially tasked with, they're tasked with finding problems that don't exist. It must be an extremely frustrating job to be in, because basically you're there to ensure that there isn't any racism, sexism, homophobia. And we all agree that those are bad things. But when I was at university in the early 2000s as an undergrad, I didn't come across any racism, sexism, homophobia. And
well, everyone would say that, I mean, I shouldn't say everyone, but, DEI people would say that that's, because, and the Racial Justice Task Force report at my own university said that, of course, the reason you didn't see it is because you're, too
white and a male.
Well, no, not only, I mean, it actually sort of says like, oh, this is an example of racism that's so embedded that people don't even know it when they see it.
Right. Which is based on the implicit. It's kind of based on the implicit association test, even though that's kind of junk science. And 2 out of 3 of the authors agree that
a version of that,
kind of a version of that.
Yeah,
it's this invisible force. It's like you've seen Star Wars before.
Oh, of course.
Dun, 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 dun. Racism binds us. It brings us together. Like the force. I mean, that's what these guys are like. You can't see it. You can't test it. You can't smell it. You don't know whether it's there or it's not. You just have to have faith in racism, right? It's bonkers.
And as you point out, like, basically their survival on campus is really contingent upon, the, sort of positive evaluations of their training or whatever. I mean, it's like, do people feel good about having gone to DEI training? Did they get it? Did they report sort of, it's like mostly sort of, posturing and it's not content heavy, and there's no evidence that it works. But if people are like, yeah, I want it, and it's, it feels good that I did it, I get to put a sticker. They have like little stickers that that you get put an ally sticker on your door or whatever,
which is just
people feel like.
No, but here's what it does, right? So on the one hand, these people are tasked with finding examples of bigotry that don't exist, and therefore persecuting perfectly innocent people for crimes that they didn't commit and would not commit. Second, it's then based on convincing people who are not victims, who are actually probably highly privileged if they're going to a prestigious university, because they cost a lot of money, right? Who are highly privileged, convincing them that they're actually victims, and then asking them to see bigotry all over the place in places where it doesn't actually exist, therefore probably creating a huge strain on their mental health, which would explain why, the huge rise in depression and so on and so forth. And finally, making sure that they don't engage with reality correctly, that they don't engage with reality in the way that the most successful disciplines in the history of civilization have done, which is via empirical analysis, right? Because empirical analysis is in and of itself oppressive. Yeah. So in all 3 ways, all 3 ways, it's anathema. It's awful. Yeah.
And it's a distraction, from real issues in in, education more broadly and in the classroom, because, look, we've got schools that are closing. We have an enrollment cliff, right? We have, now we have artificial intelligence. We have, skill issues, student engagement issues. And that's just that's in the classroom. These are problems in the classroom. We are supposed to be teachers. We are supposed to be, teaching content. But we can not teach content. We cannot address these things by, like my university says, we're still doing, we're still doing DEI.
So in the UK, for example, I'm not sure about the United States. I think it's different for the United States. But in the UK, in education, the most disadvantaged groups, aside from Irish travellers and Romani gypsies, which are very, very small, which is why they're not generally talked about, although they are seriously disadvantaged, are white working class boys. They're at the bottom. They do worse than black working class boys and Indian working class boys and all other working class boys. It's just a fact. That's not up for debate. That's what the data tells us. And yet in the UK, how many, it's not just one.
So what do you mean by disadvantaged?
They don't do as well.
What do you mean?
They do badly at school.
Do as well in school. In school.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure, like in school.
Sure. Okay. Economically, I think no, but I'm sorry, I'm talking about education. Educationally, white working class boys are the most disadvantaged. And if you go up, white middle class boys don't do the best either, compared to black middle class boys, for example. So white working class boys. So there's a problem with how white people are doing in school, and white people are also being told that they're racist all of the time, which the evidence would say in the UK is one of the least racist countries in the world. I think it's number 2 or number 3 in terms of being the least racist countries in the world. So white working class boys are doing really, really badly. They're being told that they're racist. They're being told that they're sexist and all kinds of stuff. So they're under kind of constant assault. And you might want to say, well, look, there's empirical evidence. Forget about what I said about them being under assault from all the woke nonsense. There is at least rock solid empirical evidence that they're not doing very well at school. Shouldn't we try and do something about that to help them? But no. So you get like programs, it's all about addressing racism for black people and helping black people up. And it's like, actually, the white kids are doing worse. No, I'm not saying that we should give the white kids preferential treatment. Of course not. But I'm saying that the narrative just doesn't make any sense. And it's weird kind of American narrative. If you look at conviction rates in the UK, for example, the conviction rate of white people is actually higher than the conviction rate of ethnic minorities. So all of this kind of American stuff that because in America, it doesn't show that America's racist, by the way, but in America, it is true that black kids don't do as well as white kids. In America, it is true that black people suffer a conviction rate that's higher and more severe. Now, you could say, you can explain that away. Somebody like a Will Riley would explain that away and say, here's actually why it doesn't make sense. But even if we just take it on its surface, you could at least understand how somebody who wasn't trained in social sciences or philosophy or something like that might look at that data and say, oh, okay, that's probably racism. But that data doesn't even exist in the UK. Like, it says the opposite in the UK, actually. And yet all of this American stuff is parachuted on and put down on elite institutions. And if anybody knows what they're talking about, who could pick apart this data and say, well, hold on a second, this doesn't actually apply to the UK because the data in the UK says the opposite, it would be the people, the PhDs at the elite institutions. But no,
they don't.
There's absolutely no critical thinking. Yeah. They just accept it completely uncritically and say, yes, thank you very much. And then when somebody like me points out, look, no, they try and hand wave me away and explain it away or whatever, or don't talk to me or call me a racist.
Even if they don't accept it, they won't stand up. They're cowards.
Well, here's an example. Here's an example that happened to me the other day, right? So I was debating somebody who I suspect might have been an academic. I mean, they were really, really stupid. So, they probably were an academic, because most stupid people, and as a really stupid person, there are fewer jobs that are open to you. Journalism and academia are kind of two of the.
You always say that, and I'm an academic, so
I know you're one of the special ones, Elizabeth.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Whatever.
No, but you can engage with reality. That's why you've been punished, because
No, I'm
you're
just
able
saying,
to.
like, I
It's a
converse
joke.
with academics all the time, and I
It
don't find
it's
most of them.
it's a joke. And so, well, here's where it is a joke and where it's not a joke. I'm not suggesting that they're stupid insofar as if you went to go and test their IQ, vocabulary, amount of knowledge they had on given subjects, they would come out to be quite bright. But if you tested their stupidity in another way, which would be their ability to engage with reality, they would not be. So here's an example of what I'm getting at here. So, one of the usual observations I made, which is that, one of the reasons I got cancelled, which was because I pointed out that, look, there's no evidence that Derek Chauvin was motivated out of racism. Even if he was, it wouldn't follow that his police department were racist. And even if they were, it certainly wouldn't follow that the whole of the state police were also racist. And even they were, it wouldn't follow that the whole of America is racist. And even if America was racist, it wouldn't follow that the whole of Western civilization was racist. Surely. Right? These are a whole series of non sequiturs that have been completely gleefully grabbed onto by the world's elite institutions, right? And yet they're clearly obviously wrong. And I was talking to somebody who I suspect was an academic, because the person said, well, yes, from a logical point of view, I agree. But why are you pointing this out? I know why you're pointing this out. Racism. You're a racist for pointing this out. So they agreed with me. So this points out the point, right? So obviously they understood logic. They were bright enough to have a grasp of logic. So there you go. There's the not stupid side of it. They agreed that they couldn't really disagree in terms of how the argument I'd set it out. But they're saying, well, why are you pointing out this out? Is it because you're a racist? It's obviously because you're a racist. So if you're trying to combat the narrative...
We don't talk about such things.
No.
Even if they're true, we don't.
Even if they're true, we don't talk about that.
Only racists.
And then I could say, and then we say, what happened to you? Well, why are you talking about it, Elizabeth? Well, I'll tell you why. Well, number one, because false narratives are always dangerous, right? Because people make decisions on the basis of information that is available to them. And if you're making decisions on the basis of bad information, that is far more likely to lead to a bad consequence than it is to a positive consequence. Okay, I mean, that's just should be obvious. And the information that is being presented to young ethnic minority kids is that the system is stacked against them. And so, you may try. If you try, maybe you get a better chance of succeeding, but you're probably going to fail anyway because racism. So, they'll either kind of give up and think, no, everything's messed up, maybe not form positive relationships with white people that could have helped them out, that would have probably been very happy to help them out. And they're not going to they're less likely to do well in a system because they have been convinced of bad information, which is that it's stacked against them when it isn't. So that's why we need to point these things out. But no, it's engaging with reality and being able to show that by engaging with reality, you are able to raise the opportunity of ethnic minorities, not diminish it, and that the alternative narrative is not doing them any good. But by pointing that out, you are a racist.
Yeah, to disagree with DEI is essentially, to attack it somehow. You're called, as you were, you're called, racist or whatever. So I'm sort of reminded of some research on concept creep, mm-hmm. and how words like, for example, bullying. Okay, so bullying years ago meant sort of like kids on the playground, right? And then it becomes, it gets co-opted into other areas. So now there's like workplace bullying and, other kinds of bullying. And the same is true for things like prejudice and trauma for a while, like, so now like everybody's experienced trauma. So we have racialized trauma, and we have the just, like, and I mean, you don't see this so much, where you are, but all
Oh,
of my students, they just sort of line up at the desk. It's like, I have anxiety, and I have this, and I have that, and they're all traumatized.
oh, I do see it. I do see it, and
Oh, are
look,
you getting it?
oh yeah, look. There is a robustness in Japan against this stuff for cultural reasons, because they identify as being strong and perseverant, and if you show flakiness, then it's not very good. But we're getting it insofar as if people complain, then the DEI rules, which are basically copied off American universities, will apply. So the Japanese generally won't kick up a fuss and use it, but foreigners here do. I'll give you an example.
Mm.
So previous university, an openly gay male colleague of mine, in a long-term relationship with a partner, saw a student who was urinating in public in a way that he was kind of exposing himself, went back into his office, spoke to a male colleague, another male colleague, not a female colleague, another male colleague, and said, look, I don't know what to do about this. I just saw a student urinating in public, and he was kind of in a way that was visible to other people and could be construed about exposing himself. What should we do if we come across a situation like this? And they had a conversation. It was a difficult situation. How should you raise it? How should you tackle it? And so on and so forth. A female colleague, another in the same office, Indian female colleague, by the way. India is completely awash with wokeism, Indian middle classes right now, which is interesting. Overheard what they were talking about and accused them both of sexual harassment. The university then investigated the case and found them both guilty of sexually harassing her. Even though they weren't talking to her, they weren't making a pass at her, they weren't saying anything, you've got lovely legs or anything like that. They literally were talking about something completely unrelated to her, and she overheard it. She thought that was sexual harassment because standpoint epistemology, right? I felt sexually harassed. The university investigated and they upheld her complaint.
Yeah, so this is what Haslam would call,
Concept creep, right?
Concept creep. So horizontally and vertically, this stuff is, so we have, again, sort of, bullying becomes more than just sort of, like a kick, kids on the playground, but adults at work. And it's not just, little kids, but then it's, bigger kids, and it's like not just little slights, but I mean, not just big slights, like, getting kicked or pushed off something, but it's little slights, little, microaggressions or whatever. Overhearing a conversation. By the way, now I have not looked this up, but apparently a University of Wisconsin professor, DEI officer was fired, just like today, or,
Okay.
in the last few days. She was filming herself, as people do nowadays, making a statement about, her support for Palestinian rights. Okay. And she was there was a student protest behind her. So she's saying, like, I support Palestinian rights. She's, and again, I haven't looked this up, but apparently the reason she was fired was not because she was saying I support Palestinian rights, and think that this is, horrible what they're going through, but because behind her, which she could not have known other than there were protesters behind her, but behind her was an Israeli flag with a swastika on it. So it was a protester who was waving an Israeli flag with a protester on it.
So she got fired for that?
She got fired for what was behind her. So not for what she was saying, not for her, but for what was in the background. And so that was, her background was offensive. Oh, is there anything in my background that's offensive? Like little birdie.
I mean,
Got my blue
well,
glass.
no, I mean, you could say the white doves of peace. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's offensive because I don't know. You could, I mean, you can always figure out a way to make something offensive, right?
So this is the way in which,
Oh, I've got it.
again,
My
this,
background.
sort of like,
My background's offensive.
yeah,
because it's a Japanese screen, and so therefore
oh,
I'm
yeah.
appropriating.
Mm.
Oh, here's the one I got was really
But
funny.
you know it's there, right? And I know it's there, but it's like, so this is the same idea, like that, like this researcher that was quoted in the Atlantic, this sort of layering of abstract commitment for free speech, on top of this rewarding people for investigating and, criticizing people for, for essentially taking people down a notch, and the woman was I'm pretty sure she's a minority of some minoritized, member of a minoritized group of some sort. But yeah, so apparently the excuse was, now maybe they really maybe they said that they didn't like her, what she was
Quite
saying,
possibly.
but she was saying, giving sort of giving the progressive party line, I would say, in a state, Wisconsin tends to be more of a conservative state, but still she's a DEI officer and she's, whatever. So now not only can we be criticized for, like, actually behaving in for our own personal like behavior, but also for background behavior, like your example of the hallway, right? And like this example of a woman, who has like somebody waving a flag in the background. So now, just sort of ambiance. We can be we can be investigated for what's sort of in the air.
Guilt
in the
by
background.
association, right?
Yeah.
You may not want
Yeah.
to be associated with that person, but you are associated with them. So we'll have you for guilt by association. It's very, 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 very frightening. And look, this kind of statement at MIT is not. It's nice. It is better than nothing, but only just.
Yeah, and we had talked about this once before, because Lee Jussum had posted on his Substack, oh, good news, I actually benefited from being canceled, and all this good stuff has happened to me and everything, and we're on the, we're winning the battle or whatever, and I think that a lot of people like us who were canceled, who don't have, amazing publication records and, friends in high places, and we're at like more sort of regular jobs. We're just like regular folks, right? I think there's a lot of people like us who are saying, who would say that the battle is, that ruined personal and professional lives, who would say it's not over, that, it's still going on, and a few statements here or there, a few success stories here or there. Claudine Gay lost her presidency job, but she's making the same amount of money as a tenured faculty member at the school.
And she's teaching research ethics.
And she's teaching research ethics. So, and she's got a huge book deal where she's probably most likely going to write about the tragedy of being persecuted, when DEI was, just starting to make headway and that kind of thing. I sent that Forbes article.
Yes.
Which
was bonkers. Like, this stuff is obviously good, but the bit that I did agree with was the author was saying, look, Okay, the bit I didn't agree with is, look, this is a major. I think he was kind of trying to make out that this was a setback. But then he was saying,
So
look,
it's
the battle for
I think it's Julie Kratz.
yeah,
Are companies quietly quitting, quiet quitting DEI? So quiet quitting is, like where you don't actually do anything, so the idea of quiet quitting is you show up at your job, but you don't do anything and you just sort of wait to, be fired or whatever. So people say, I'm quiet quitting. I'm not working overtime anymore. I'm not showing up early. I'm not, like eating my lunch at my desk. I'm going to just go collect my paycheck and stuff. So basically she's arguing, she's saying, that she's using quiet quitting as, our organization's quiet quitting, DEI. So anyway, go ahead.
No, I mean, the bit that was bonkers was that she was kind of making the case that, look, it's obvious that DEI is a massive force for good in the world. And it's like, no, it's really, really not.
No, there's really no evidence at all that DEI, training program, having a DEI office on campus or at a place of business is really improving. In fact, some research shows that there's a backlash, right? That you force this training on people, and it just sort of makes them it's irritating, it's upsetting, it makes people resent one another. They resent the time having to go to the training, but they also resent that maybe merit. People, they start to look sideways. It's like, well, why'd you get your job? And then if you are a minority, you wonder why. Well, did I get promoted because of that, or did I get promoted because I'm truly, the better employee?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and to give kind of evidence of this backlash, because this backlash is already happening, I think, would be against gay people. There is evidence, particularly amongst conservatives, that acceptance of LGBT people and gay marriage is actually on the decline, which is very, very worrying. And this is, again, you being the social psychologist is going to say, okay, causation, correlation, right? But I would argue that this is coming as a direct consequence of propaganda coming from the Chinese Communist Party. Now that sounds wacky, but if you look at the Chinese Communist Party's the relationship that they have with big Chinese companies, it's very clear and it's very well understood and well known that they basically have complete control over them. They aren't able to innovate, and as soon as Chinese billionaires, for example, start to get big ideas and go in directions that the Communist Party doesn't want them to go in, they're cut. They either have to flee to other countries or, more likely they just disappear. So yeah, the Chinese Communist Party keeps a very tight hand on these. And one of the companies it's keeping a very, very tight handle on is TikTok. And TikTok is, very, very, very popular amongst Generation Z, very young people. And that's why the intelligence services are warning Congress and the US government, and the US government is making noises about banning it in the United States. Whether that's a good thing or not, you could debate because of free speech and so on and so forth. You could also argue that foreign governments don't have the same free speech rights in America that an American citizen does. But anyway, so if you look at what they do, but hold on, if you look at what they're doing, right? I just want to give context to the backlash, right? Is they are taking nutcases like this woman, like people who would hold the view that DEI is obviously an unambiguous good, which is a nutty point of view to have. They're taking the extreme form of those nutcases. I mean, she would probably put this nutty point of view in a superficially benign way, but they're taking the extreme form of these people, which are these pink-haired, loads of piercings, tattooed, they, them pronouns, kind of people on TikTok saying ridiculously wacky things. They're then taking those videos, algorithmically boosting them, planting them into the magosphere with the intention of saying, look, this is the authentic LGBT voice. The MAGA lot then think, look, this is the authentic LGBT voice, which of course it isn't. All gay people are like that. Therefore, we have to push back against gay people. Therefore, we have to be really concerned about LGBT propaganda, when actually the propaganda, it might come from an LGBT person, but it's not representative of the community, and actually it's something that's being pushed by a foreign power. And that is creating a backlash. There is evidence there's evidence for the backlash. Again, correlation, causation. But I would say that as a piece of causation is highly plausible.
Well, certainly. I mean, I obviously I don't know anything. I can't. But certainly there's plenty of talk, as you point out, testimony, discussion, at congressional levels and stuff about pushing essentially, Russia and China interfering simply to create chaos about
That's exactly
whether
it.
it's
We know that Russia are also doing it. So the Chinese method seems to be via TikTok to create disunity around the LGBT thing, and they're using legitimate crazy American people and then pushing it. And they're also, by the way, you also get them finding legitimate crazy MAGA people and pushing them as well too, by the way. And then saying that that's representative of anybody who identifies as being conservative, which is obviously not true, because MAGA itself is a radical movement and therefore anathema to conservatism as an ideology, right? It wants to tear down all of these institutions and replace them with something new that is inherently radical. What the Russians will do, and there is very, very clear evidence for this because the whole IP chain has been traced, is they will start pushing MAGA and they will start pushing BLM at the same time from the same data center. And then they will try and organize a MAGA rally and the Black Lives Matter protest right next to each other. At the same time, right next to each other, so as to cause maximum disunity. And what they're trying to do, what I believe is the intelligence strategy, the disinformation strategy, I should say, from the FSB, and I think China is just playing along with it and using their economic resources by pushing TikTok, is not to empower one side or the other, but to empower both sides as much as they can, so as to cause maximum disunity. So I would be very surprised, for example, if they're not trying to organize MAGA rallies next to Palestinian protests and
So I did. One of the reasons I sent the
Forbes one,
the quiet quitting article, what she's saying, she says, in reality, well, first she says, that organizations, there's these, links to articles, state legislators are cutting DEI education programs in certain states. The affirmative action decision at the Supreme Court level, some, lawsuits that are challenging. By the way, some of these lawsuits are challenging private foundation money that people are allocating for minorities. So clearly, if you are a private foundation, you have the right to, if you want to give money to, only people who meet like 5 different, you have to meet all 5 minority, categories. They can do that. They're a private foundation. They can do whatever they want with their money. So I don't think some of those lawsuits, are going to make it. But regardless, she says, that in reality, DEI is growing. So more than half of U.S. executives say their organizations have expanded their offices. 57% of corporate executives say they've grown their diversity commitments. 91% say that the affirmative action rulings have not lessened their prioritization of DEI. Now, what I will say, again, she keeps going on, it's growing. And I think that, would, in general, you and I would say, well, it's definitely not going away anytime soon, whether it's growing or not. I mean, I don't know that companies or universities are actually at this point growing their DEI. There's only so many jobs. It's like you can't keep adding. So one of the statistics, if we take a statistic that, DEI has stagnated, or that maybe it has even, dropped a little bit, that's not necessarily suggesting that offices are going away. It's just that DEI experienced a surge of hiring, and now it's they've filled the jobs.
Let's give a corollary. Like in an argument I was having with somebody the other day who was saying that the US military is absolutely, it was a kind of communist person, someone who actually calls himself a communist and thinks Mao was brilliant and the rest of it. And this person said that, look, the American military is pathetic now. And I said, hold on a second, it's by far and away the most powerful military force ever to have existed at any point in human history. And his response was, oh, really? Well, look at all of these recruiting problems that they're having. It's like, yeah, okay, that's a problem. That might weaken it in certain areas. Doesn't mean it's still not the most powerful military in the world, because here are the facts and figures, and here are all of the other problems that other militaries have. For example, the Chinese one, which has just discovered that its rockets that it would need to launch if it wanted to invade Taiwan don't work. And the whole organization tasked with firing them is absolutely corrupt, and that's why there's a whole purge going on. It doesn't follow. And so, when you have these, and this is the big mistake, and we talked about this earlier a little bit, when you're saying that DEI has stagnated, maybe that's true. Maybe it has stagnated. Maybe people are paying lip service to it, so in terms of quiet quitting. Maybe even its power has decreased. Maybe even its power has decreased significantly. Let's say 25% would be a significant... I don't think so. Wait for a second. No, I don't think it's decreased, but just wait, you'll see what I mean. Maybe it's decreased by 50%. I don't think it's anything like that. Even if DEI power decreased by 50%, it would still be bloody powerful within the institutions, right? What we're really seeing, a decrease in power, I don't know if there has been any decrease. If there has been a decrease, I would say it's only very marginal. I'm not sure about there being an increase. I think stagnation might be about right. But in any case, in the case of a significant decrease, in the case of a gradual decrease, in the case of stagnation, in each A, B, or C, DEI still remains plenty powerful enough to wreck people's lives and careers. Plenty powerful enough.
And, while we do, look, the Society for Human Resources Management has an annual conference. And, a couple years ago, even last year, they had, multiple tracks that were related to diversity, whether it's hiring, creating diversity offices, creating training for diversity. This year they have one track, and they're calling it, they don't call it diversity, equity, inclusion. They're calling it inclusion, diversity, and equity. So they just rearranged the words. Okay. But, and there's a pre-conference workshop that you would have to pay extra for that is, specifically, I would say pretty specifically DEI related. If you do a search on their conference, which is in a month or so, if you do a search on their conference page for the word diversity, 69 things come up. Okay. But only the first few are actually focused on diversity. So what people have done is they've still put diversity in their description, like their abstract or their keywords or something like that. They've put it in there. But when you read through the conference, the brief descriptions, you find that that the focus is not on what is more traditionally DEI. It is very much still that concept creep, where it's about making people feel comfortable at work, and it's making anxiety, and it's some of those same concept creep things, but they're not calling it the same thing. So I think one of the issues that we have is that just like what Korbluth did, is they're sort of like, as you say, paying homage to oh, my right hand, look at what's happening in my right hand. Oh no, look over here with my left hand, kind of, they're sort of, they're trying maybe to have it both ways. And, if you look at the states, where like Florida and Texas that started, saying like, oh, there can't be any more diversity, at the DEI stuff at the universities, you got to dismantle these offices and stuff. One of the things that you find is that, they're rejiggering the people, moving them around, but they'll still tell you, and got caught, by the way, on camera saying, no, we're still doing the same thing. We just have to do it differently. We can't call it this. We have to call it this other thing. So, the office of, I actually had it written down here, becomes the Gender and Sexuality Center becomes the Women's Community Center.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're still doing the same thing. They've just renamed it. They've also pushed a lot of DEI work out to student groups. So they've, if you have interns or work study students or something that are working in the office, then it isn't technically a university, employee kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that even if on the surface, like you said, we have a decrease, in part because of some of the lawsuits or the state laws or whatever, I think that the people have been sufficiently, especially at universities, but other places too, sufficiently indoctrinated. And if you haven't been indoctrinated, you are, again, some of this is a public good now. People simply expect to get certain kinds of services, certain kinds of, honorifics, special, dispensations for, lots of special categories, whether that's race or whether that's because you have, anxiety or trauma or whatever. People have an expectation now. And that's not easy to get rid of.
No.
It's just not.
People don't want to give up a privilege, right?
No. And so, that's why things like, Obamacare are going to be hard to get rid of. They, sort of socialized, it's not socialized medicine really, but it's socialized, it's, it's like creeping toward, but it's going to be hard to get rid of because now people expect Social Security the same way in the US. It's like, it's a public good,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I'm just not confident that, that it's just, I look at the MIT statement as another statement. Like it's just another thing like we support Israel or we support Palestine or we, Black Lives Matter or whatever. It's just another version of that.
It's performative.
Performative. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
I'm glad for it, I guess.
It's a little bit better than nothing, yeah.
But, right? Yeah.
It's a
As
shuffle.
bad things go, this is
Yeah, maybe it's a shuffle in the right direction. What I would say though, what I would absolutely say, that is positive, is very, 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 very positive, is that the shift in the attitude of the general public is massive. If you look, and measurably massive as well. So if you look at YouTube clicks on, did you hear about The Acolyte?
I don't think so.
So The Acolyte is Disney's next multi-billion, I don't know, huge big budget Star Wars saga on television. And instead of making it about Luke Skywalker or maybe even a female Luke Skywalker or Jedis and making it about them fighting for justice and being the archetypical heroes that we know work and resonate with us because that's how folklore has always worked. If you go to mythology, why is it that these stories stuck? Because it's a certain narrative structure that resonates with human beings. Do you know what I mean? Probably even resonated with proto-humans, that had language, like Homo neanderthalis. If we could go back and test them, I bet you they would be telling hero narratives as well. All the way back to the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is the very first one, where Gilgamesh and Enkidu fight this battle, and then they go out and become friends. And there's the whole salvation narrative in there with Gilgamesh, who's this tyrannical king, and Enkidu kind of shows him the error of his ways, and he commits to becoming this hero figure, right? And Christianity's the same thing, the salvation of mankind. You always get these salvation stories that, and Star Wars is exactly the same. You've got Luke Skywalker, and he saves his father, Darth Vader, who turns to the light side again. It's fantastic stuff, and as a kid, I just absolutely loved that. So, and we know that these structures work. We've got thousands of years of evidence. Maybe not controlled studies, but the fact that these stories have survived, I think, is evidence on that level, if not even greater, right? Because, as you would always say, social psychology, just because it's not replicated doesn't mean that it's a bad study, right? I was actually speaking with Lee about this recently. It may have been replicated if you could have done that at the same time, but culture has moved on. Culture has not moved on from the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? The stories have the same structural narrative. It hasn't. Well, culture has in many, many, many ways, but not in that regard, right? That hero narrative absolutely has not. From ancient Mesopotamia to ancient Egypt, to ancient Greece, to ancient Rome, to the medieval period, the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, World War I, World War II, the 1970s, the 80s, the 90s, in stories, films, music, this is what works. It's what always has worked. And so, if you want to create a successful piece of entertainment, then that's what you need. You need a hero narrative, a hero that represents something good about the culture. So, latest Star Wars thing. What have they done? They are presenting, I think, this is, if the leaks are true, maybe they're not, but I would be surprised if they weren't. They are presenting the Jedi as basically evil, and the hero is a black, they, them pronouns, anti-Jedi who goes around killing people. And that's what it's about. Aren't you shocked? Surprised?
Yeah.
No. And so on YouTube, you've got the reactions of the YouTube hid the dislike button ages ago, but you can still use add-ons to your browser, so you can actually see it and you can re-enable it. So obviously nobody likes this. The thumbs up to thumbs down ratio is phenomenal. But it's being pushed. But here's the thing. Here's the positive news. The negative news is that we're being pushed out with this crap. The positive news is that we have decades worth of entertainment that doesn't push it. So you can always go back, right? And see stuff that you haven't seen before. That's great.
And decades worth of history that suggests that this won't last.
No, and it can't. And here's the point, because it's completely unsustainable. So Disney's stocks are tanking. The consumption of their media is also tanking. So on the one hand, they're losing money because people aren't buying their products, and on the other hand, they're losing money because investors know that people aren't buying their products. So it's not sustainable fundamentally. They can keep going and burying their head in the sand and putting out more and more woke content, only up until a point. Eventually the money will run out, and they will either have to change, or they will die, or probably most likely they will run themselves into the ground so much that somebody will come up and pick them up at a really cheap price, and then go back to doing what they did in the 1980s, resurrect the original intellectual property and do it in a good way. All the intellectual property will expire.
Yeah, so hopefully merit will also make a return, right?
Would be nice.
Yeah.
That would be nice. So I don't want to end on a negative note, like, let's put things into context while we sum up. There are people who are making the case that this MIT statement that the firing of Gay and all of these are massive victories. Look, they're not negative developments.
Right.
They're positive developments.
They may be tiny victories.
Right. But you don't think that this war is even close to having swung in our favor. Like, it really hasn't. Is DEI increasing in power? I'm not sure. It may be. I would suggest that if it is increasing power, that the speed at which it is increasing power is slowing. That may be for a number of reasons. It may be cultural, and it may also be economic, because there's only so many DEI people you can hire. It's headed into a brick wall because its narrative structure just doesn't work. And it's fundamentally antithetical to science, which has brought about all of these wonderful developments.
And the core values that universities, again, similarly, historically,
well, not just the scientific method and the fundamental way of interrogating the world, but the liberal values as well, which kind of correspond with that, right? The culture has rejected it, and the culture will even. I even suspect that wokies would prefer, people who are really bought into it. I even suspect that they would, even if they wouldn't admit it, prefer to watch the original Star Wars films than some kind of weird cultural construct that won't resonate with them on a fundamental level, because they're human beings. So, this stuff is doomed. In the elite institutions, it's still dangerously powerful. But ultimately is doomed. So my short-term prognosis would be pessimistic. Even if it's declined significantly, and I don't think that it has. My position is either increased a little bit, it's stagnated, or it's decreased a little bit. Those are the three possibilities. In any of those cases, and even if it's decreased in power significantly, let's add a fourth one, it is still extremely powerful and more than capable of wrecking your career for no good reason. So it still needs absolutely resisting. These Pyrrhic victories are only Pyrrhic. They are not a sign of a massive change. But in the long term, I'm extremely optimistic, because it's completely unsustainable both from a narrative structure in terms of what human beings like and what resonates with them and the kind of stories that they like. From a scientific basis, because it's against science fundamentally, because it views science as a means of oppression. And on a moral level, I just don't think that it can survive. How long? I don't know. Short-term negative, long-term positive. Good. So thank you very much.